In the quiet stillness where philosophy meets life, we invite ourselves into the reflections of John Dewey's human nature and conduct. Dewey, a thinker of profound clarity, takes us by the hand and leads us to see that our lives are not shaped by fate, nor by some hidden destiny, but by the invisible currents of habit that flow through every choice we make. What seems like free will, what seems like sudden decision, is often the echo of habits laid down over years. Yet within this recognition lies not limitation but possibility, for if habits can shape us, then with awareness, we too can reshape them and in doing so reshape life itself. Habits are not small things. They are the very architecture of conduct. To speak of habit is not to speak of trivial routines such as brushing one's teeth or walking a familiar path to work, but to speak of the silent forces that determine the direction of thought, the ease of action, the contours of character. Dewey saw habits as the channels through which human energy flows. Like water, life does not pour out onto bare land in pure spontaneity, it follows grooves and trenches carved over time. These grooves are our habits and they lead us, often unconsciously, toward repetition, toward continuity, toward the predictable expression of what has already been. But it is here that Dewey makes a striking revelation. Habits are not prisons. They are not shackles that bind us permanently. They are living, dynamic patterns, created by past choices, influenced by environment, yet open to reconfiguration. Just as a river may carve a canyon but still find a new course in flood, so too habits can be redirected when consciousness awakens. If we fail to see this, we fall into fatalism. If we embrace it, we discover the psychology of freedom. Freedom, then, is not the absence of habit but the cultivation of new and better ones. Here Dewey departs from the old philosophy that painted freedom as a mysterious inner spark, unbound by circumstance. He tells us instead, freedom lives in conduct, in practice, in the art of reshaping our habitual tendencies toward greater intelligence and purpose. To become free is to become skillful in the making of ourselves. Consider how often we say, "I decided." What do we mean by this? Dewey would suggest that decisions do not emerge from thin air. A decision is the resolution of conflicting tendencies, the victory of one habit over another, one impulse over another. When you choose to rise early rather than sleep in, it is not pure will that lifts you from bed, but the cumulative strength of a habit of diligence, struggling with a habit of indulgence. Decision is not the creation of a new self but the momentary arbitration of existing patterns. To understand this is to strip away illusions and begin to see the real machinery of the psyche. Yet if habits are so decisive, where then is the place for impulses? Dewey warns us not to think of impulses as enemies of order. Impulses are the fresh winds that stir stagnant waters. They are the energy that resists the rigidity of habit. Without impulse, habit becomes fossilized, mere repetition. Without habit, impulse is scattered, wasted like sparks on water. It is their interplay that creates growth. When a new impulse challenges an old habit, we are invited to reconsider, to adapt, to expand. This is how societies evolve, and how individuals grow beyond the comfort of their routines. Dewey saw moral education not as the memorization of rules, but as the intelligent cultivation of habits. To educate morally is to shape conduct in such a way that good becomes easier, more natural, more joyful. Virtue in this light is not heroism but practiced ease. A person of honesty is not one who wrestles with temptation each day and heroically resists. A person of honesty is one whose habits have been so tuned that dishonesty barely occurs as a live possibility. Morality is, at its best, second nature, not imposed from outside but arising from within through long shaping. But this recognition leads to both hope and responsibility. If habits govern character, then environments govern habits. The individual is not merely a self-contained actor, but a being continuously shaped by culture, by institutions, by the material and emotional climate in which they live. A child raised in a world of fairness and respect is inclined toward justice. A child raised in fear and suspicion is inclined toward mistrust. Education, family, politics, work, all of these are laboratories where habits are formed. To change society, then, is to reshape the environments that seed and reinforce our conduct. Yet we should not think that environments determine us once and for all. For Dewey, the human being is always in process. We are creatures of adaptation, and our intelligence is the tool that allows us to step back from the blind momentum of habit and ask, what is this pattern serving? What does it produce? Is it aligned with the kind of life I want to live? In such questioning, freedom awakens. Decision-making becomes not merely the collision of habits and impulses, but a conscious art, the deliberate redirection of energy toward more meaningful ends. Think of a person at a crossroads in their career. They feel torn between the habit of security, the well-paying but uninspiring job, and the impulse of creativity, the urge to strike out on a new venture. Neither force alone is sufficient. Habit would keep them safe but stagnant. Impulse would fling them into the unknown without preparation. But through reflection, through deliberation, a synthesis emerges. They may begin the new venture gradually, testing, learning, shaping new habits of courage while preserving stability. This is decision-making in Dewey's sense, not the triumph of sheer will, but the intelligence of harmonizing impulse and habit into a new pattern. If we extend this understanding, we find that society itself is an organism of habits. Customs, traditions, laws, these are social habits, the collective grooves that guide behavior. They carry the weight of continuity but can also become rigid, oppressive, resistant to needed change. Social progress arises when fresh impulses, the demand for equality, the cry for justice, the invention of new technologies, press against these hardened structures. The health of a society depends on its ability to let impulses breathe into habit, so that renewal is constant rather than catastrophic. Dewey thus invites us to see decision-making not as a solitary act of mind, but as a woven process, shaped by history, nurtured by environment, guided by the creative interplay of habit and impulse. He dissolves the old dualisms, reason versus passion, freedom versus determinism, self versus society, into a living continuum. To live wisely is not to deny habit or impulse, but to learn how to let them converse, to cultivate environments where they produce growth, and to take responsibility for the patterns we reinforce in ourselves and others. And here, in the early stages of his great reflection, we already glimpse the central message, that freedom is not a gift given once and for all, nor an abstract principle but a daily practice, a practice of shaping habits, channeling impulses, and situating ourselves in conditions where intelligence can flourish. This is the ground on which Dewey builds his philosophy of conduct. He does not scold us into virtue with rules, nor seduce us with lofty ideals detached from reality. Instead, he takes us into the fabric of ordinary life, and shows us how the invisible threads of habit and impulse are constantly weaving our character. And he whispers, if you learn to weave with awareness, you may transform the whole tapestry. If we step deeper into Dewey's reflections, we begin to see that his treatment of human conduct is not merely a study of psychology, nor merely a map of ethics, but a living dialogue between what we are and what we may become. He places us in the middle of life's current, showing us how decisions are never made in isolation but are drawn from the reservoirs of habit, culture, and the countless experiences that flow through us. To understand conduct is therefore not only to ask, what do I choose? But also who is choosing through me? At the heart of this exploration is the subtle interplay between impulse and habit. Dewey does not condemn impulse as chaotic or disruptive. Rather, he suggests that impulses are the raw energies of life, the forces that prevent us from becoming machines of routine. Without impulses, life would stagnate into pure repetition. Nothing new could emerge. At the same time, impulses by themselves are not enough. They need guidance, channeling, and integration into habits that give them shape and direction. To live wisely is not to suppress impulse, nor to be enslaved by it, but to weave it into habits that reflect intelligence and foresight. Think of a child who first learns to walk. The impulse to move is powerful and instinctive, yet without repeated attempts, without the practice that forms habit, the impulse would lead nowhere. But once the habit forms, walking becomes second nature, and the child's world expands. Life itself works in this rhythm, the spark of impulse and the enduring structure of habit, combined in a dance that builds character. The adult, too, is constantly reshaped by this interplay. Even when we feel that our character is fixed, impulses remain ready to break through, offering opportunities for renewal if we know how to integrate them. This is where intelligence enters the scene, not as a detached faculty hovering above life, but as a way of guiding the meeting of habit and impulse. Intelligence is not, in Dewey's view, an aloof reasoner but a practical navigator. It observes, reflects, experiments, and adjusts. When an old habit no longer serves, intelligence notices the discord and searches for a better pattern. This is the essence of decision-making, not a heroic moment of absolute freedom, but the continuous adjustment of life's flow, in which intelligence collaborates with impulse and habit to form new conduct. What, then, becomes of freedom in this picture? Dewey challenges the notion that freedom is simply doing whatever one pleases. Such a view reduces freedom to impulse alone, leaving one vulnerable to whim and circumstance. True freedom, he argues, arises from the intelligent use of habits, when we can reflect upon them, modify them, and direct them toward chosen ends. In this sense, freedom is not an escape from conditioning but an art of reshaping it. It is the recognition that while we inherit a world of customs and habits, we are also participants in their transformation. This has profound implications for how we think about character. Character, in Dewey's sense, is not an inner essence hidden within us, but the visible pattern of habits we live by. When someone is described as courageous, patient, or generous, it is not because of some mystical inner quality but because their habits consistently express those traits. Character is not what we think of ourselves in isolation, but how our conduct unfolds in the stream of life. And because habits can be reshaped, character too is not fixed. It is a living project, an evolving composition that we write with every choice and adjustment. Yet Dewey does not present this as a simple task. To reshape habits is difficult precisely because they operate with such subtlety. Much of our conduct is automatic, woven into us by culture, education, and repetition long before we become aware of it. We may believe we are acting freely when in fact we are repeating the patterns of society. The challenge, then, is to cultivate self-awareness, not as endless self-criticism but as the attentive observation of how our habits are working, how they align or clash with our values, and how they might be redirected toward richer ends. Here lies the true significance of moral education. For Dewey, education is not about memorizing doctrines or moral codes but about shaping habits of thought and action that enable intelligent conduct. A child taught to repeat moral rules without understanding may appear virtuous, but such virtue is brittle. It cannot withstand the pressures of new situations. True education equips the individual with the ability to reflect, to experiment, and to adapt. It nurtures habits that are flexible, creative, and responsive to the changing circumstances of life. In this sense, education is the cultivation of freedom itself. Imagine a society in which education were truly shaped by this vision. Schools would not merely teach children to conform but would guide them in the art of intelligent decision-making. Lessons would not simply be about right answers but about exploring problems, testing solutions, and reflecting on outcomes. In such a world, morality would not be a static code handed down from above, but a living practice of growth. Every individual would learn not only how to live well for themselves but how their conduct contributes to the fabric of society. And here Dewey brings us to the social dimension of conduct. We do not live as isolated selves. Our habits are profoundly shaped by the communities in which we dwell. Customs, institutions, traditions, all of these are the collective habits of societies. Just as the individual must reflect upon and reshape personal habits, so too must societies reflect upon their collective patterns. Justice, law, and culture are not immutable structures but evolving habits of a people, and their worth depends on how well they serve human growth and freedom. Thus, ethical progress is not simply an individual task but a collective one. We are all participants in the ongoing shaping of civilization's character. From this perspective, the work of democracy takes on new meaning. Democracy, for Dewey, is not merely a system of voting or governance but a way of life in which intelligence, communication, and shared reflection guide collective conduct. A democratic society recognizes that its customs must be open to revision, that new impulses must be heard, and that education must prepare citizens not for obedience but for thoughtful participation. In this way, democracy becomes the social expression of the same principle that guides individual conduct, the intelligent reshaping of habits in light of new experiences. It is striking, then, how Dewey dissolves the rigid boundary between psychology and ethics. He shows us that moral conduct is not something mysterious, detached from our everyday lives, but the natural outcome of how we manage impulses, habits, and intelligence. To speak of ethics is not to speak of lofty ideals alone but to speak of the very texture of our lives, how we choose, how we adapt, how we grow. Every decision, no matter how small, participates in this grand experiment of shaping character and society. As we reflect upon his vision, we may ask ourselves, how are our own habits shaping us today? Which impulses do we honor and which do we suppress? Do our habits reflect intelligence, or are they remnants of unexamined routines? These are not abstract questions but practical ones, for they determine the quality of our lives and the direction of our communities. Dewey invites us not to escape into ideals but to engage with the living material of conduct itself. His philosophy is a call to wakefulness, to see our habits clearly, to guide them intelligently, and to build a life that harmonizes freedom with responsibility. And so, as it draws us further into this current, we see the arc of Dewey's thought beginning to expand from the individual to the social, from the psychology of decision-making to the ethics of culture. We glimpse the promise of a philosophy that does not remain in the study but enters the world of classrooms, workplaces, and political life. For Dewey, To study human nature and conduct is to study the art of living together wisely. And this art, like any art, requires practice, imagination, and above all, the courage to revise ourselves. As we continue, Dewey's reflections guide us further into the nature of character itself, revealing it as a living, evolving composition rather than a fixed essence. Character is the outward pattern of our habits made visible in conduct, the cumulative expression of repeated choices, each of which carries the imprint of past tendencies and the potential for future transformation. To speak of character, then, is not to point to a mystical inner substance but to observe the way impulses and habits converge to create continuity in our lives. Each act, each gesture, each decision participates in this quiet artistry, shaping the ongoing narrative of who we are. Dewey emphasizes that character is profoundly social, born not in isolation but in the interplay of human beings with each other and with the environments they inhabit. From the earliest moments of life, we absorb the patterns of our culture, family, and community. We imitate, adapt, and internalize, and through this process the foundations of character are laid. A society that nurtures fairness, empathy, and curiosity produces individuals whose habits reflect these values. Conversely, when fear, prejudice, or stagnation dominate the social environment, the habits that form reflect these distortions. Character, therefore, is not only personal, it is cultural, molded by the living context in which we grow. Yet while character is shaped by society, it is never entirely determined by it. Within every individual resides the capacity to observe, reflect, and reorganize their own patterns of conduct. Here lies the essence of moral responsibility. We may not choose the habits that greet us at birth, nor the impulses that stir within us, but we do choose how to respond to them. Each reflection, each act of conscious adjustment, strengthens certain habits and weakens others, gradually reshaping the trajectory of character. Freedom, in this sense, is inseparable from responsibility, the freedom to guide the development of our own habits, and the responsibility to exercise that freedom with awareness. The exercise of this freedom is intimately connected to imagination. Imagination allows us to project ourselves into new possibilities, to foresee consequences, and to empathize with the experiences of others. It is the faculty that transforms impulse into moral insight, that transforms abstract reflection into practical conduct. Without imagination, our choices remain narrow, bound by the confines of what is already familiar. With imagination, we can experiment with new forms of habit, testing, observing, and gradually building patterns that extend the range of our ethical and practical capacities. In every thoughtful act, imagination is at work, bridging the present and the potential, the habitual and the novel. Dewey also draws attention to the fragility of character. Though enduring, character is not immutable. Circumstances may disrupt habits. Impulses may gain strength against previously stable tendencies. A person known for honesty may succumb to deceit in moments of pressure. A courageous leader may falter in unexpected crisis. This fragility is not cause for despair but for vigilance. Character, being alive, requires continuous cultivation, reflection, and adaptation. Neglect allows rigidity or erosion. Attention permits growth and renewal. In this dynamic, we see again that ethics is not about fixed rules but about ongoing engagement with the shaping forces of life. From the individual, Dewey moves naturally to the social implications of his insights. Just as individual character is formed through habit and reflection, so too is the moral character of society. Injustice and oppression are sustained not only by laws and institutions but by ingrained habits of perception, thought, and interaction. Habits of prejudice, neglect, and indifference echo through generations, forming collective patterns that resist reform. To change society, therefore, requires not merely legislation but the deliberate cultivation of new habits at every level. Habits of seeing, listening, speaking, and acting that affirm dignity, fairness, and growth. Ethical progress, in Dewey's view, is inseparable from social transformation. At this point, we can imagine the arc of moral life as a continuous, living experiment. Every action, every choice, every moment of reflection is an opportunity to realign habits, to direct impulses toward growth, and to expand the reach of intelligence and imagination. Moral education, then, is less about imparting static knowledge and more about nurturing capacities, curiosity, empathy, reflection, and courage, that allow individuals and communities to navigate the complex terrain of life with insight and creativity. To illustrate, consider the story of a young professional named Ravi, whose habitual focus on personal gain once dictated every decision. Over time, he became aware of the impact of his choices on his community and environment. A new impulse, conscience, awareness of interdependence, emerged within him. It challenged the old habit of self-interest, and through reflection, experimentation, and intelligence, he gradually formed new habits, investing in sustainable practices, mentoring others, and engaging in civic efforts. Character is thus continuously formed and reformed in the interplay between impulse, habit, intelligence, and social awareness. Similarly, imagine Aisha, a teacher in a rural village. Her inherited habit was to teach through rote repetition, valuing obedience over inquiry. Yet the restless curiosity of her students stirred an impulse to experiment with her teaching, to introduce dialogue, creative projects, and participatory learning. Over time, she reshaped her own habits, fostering a classroom culture that nurtured intelligence, imagination, and moral sensibility. In these stories, we see Dewey's principles embodied. Character is formed through the intelligent reorganization of habits in response to impulse, and ethical life is inseparable from the continuous shaping of our environment and our own conduct within it. In all of this, Dewey's vision of decision-making becomes clearer. Choice is not the expression of some isolated, abstract will. It is the process through which past habits, present impulses, and future possibilities converge. Each decision is a small experiment in conduct, an opportunity to align action with values, to expand the capacity for growth, and to cultivate the moral and social possibilities inherent in human life. The ordinary moments of daily living, speaking honestly, acting kindly, reflecting on consequences, are the laboratories of character. There are no grand separations between philosophy and life. There are only acts of conscious attention in the midst of experience. As this unfolds, the understanding deepens. Ethics, psychology, and social philosophy are not separate domains but a single continuum. The habits that form character are shaped by personal experience and social context alike. The impulses that stir within us are guided by intelligence and imagination. Decisions are experiments that test, refine, and extend these patterns. And through this ongoing process, both individuals and societies grow, evolve, and adapt, achieving a form of moral life that is both practical and profound. Dewey's reflections invite us, finally, to embrace the responsibility inherent in growth. Freedom is not the absence of structure or the license to act without restraint. It is the capacity to cultivate habits that expand our intelligence, to direct impulses toward constructive ends, and to shape the environments in which ethical conduct can flourish. Character, fragile yet resilient, is the visible expression of this work, and society itself is the broader canvas upon which these dynamics play out. To live ethically, then, is to engage continuously with the shaping forces of habit, impulse, intelligence, and imagination, knowing that every decision contributes to the ongoing creation of self and community. As we move into the final phase of Dewey's reflections, we see clearly that ethics is not a set of external rules imposed upon life, but the intelligent shaping of life itself. The ordinary currents of experience, the impulses that rise within us, the habits we carry, the environments in which we live, become the very material of ethical practice. Morality is not separate from living. It is the texture of living refined by awareness, reflection, and imagination. In this way, Dewey dissolves the old dualism between action and thought, showing us that to act wisely is to think attentively, and to think wisely is to act with intelligence. Consider the psychology of decision-making as Dewey presents it. Every choice is an experiment, a convergence of past habits, present impulses, and projected consequences. No decision arises in isolation. Each is embedded in the network of experience and expectation that constitutes our life. When we deliberate, we do not escape habit but bring it into consciousness, weighing tendencies against impulses, envisioning outcomes, and testing the coherence of our intentions. Decision, then, is a dynamic art, a living interplay of continuity and innovation, requiring both courage and reflection. Ethical life, for Dewey, is inseparable from growth. Habits are the channels through which life energy flows, but they must remain open to revision. Impulses are the sparks of novelty, yet without guidance, they scatter. Intelligence is the faculty that harmonizes these forces, shaping conduct that is flexible, adaptive, and oriented toward well-being. Growth is not a passive unfolding. It is the continuous reorganization of habit and impulse under the direction of reflective intelligence. To live ethically is to participate consciously in this process, aware that every choice contributes to the formation of character and the shaping of society. In this vision, freedom takes on its deepest meaning. It is not the license to act without restraint, nor the metaphysical gift of some detached will. Freedom is the capacity to guide one's own development, to choose how habits are reinforced, how impulses are directed, and how intelligence is exercised in the ongoing project of living. A person may be constrained by circumstances, yet within those limits the capacity for growth remains. True freedom resides in this capacity, the ability to observe, reflect, experiment, and transform moment by moment, habit by habit, decision by decision. Dewey's insights extend naturally to the social realm. Habits are not formed in isolation and character is not developed alone. Communities, institutions, families, and educational systems all shape the patterns that guide conduct. Social progress, therefore, depends on the cultivation of environments that support intelligent habits, that allow impulses to be expressed constructively, and that nurture reflection and imagination. Injustice, oppression, and inequality are not only political or economic issues, they are ethical concerns, for they limit the capacity for growth in individuals and societies alike. To build a just society is to shape collective habits, to guide impulses toward shared well-being, and to cultivate institutions that encourage continuous learning and adaptation. This brings us to the role of education, which Dewey elevates to a moral enterprise. Education is not mere instruction in facts or rules, it is the deliberate cultivation of habits that enable thoughtful, ethical, and intelligent conduct. A child taught merely to obey is not truly educated. A student whose curiosity is stifled will never develop the capacity for reflective decision-making. By contrast, education that nurtures inquiry, imagination, and the capacity to reorganize habits prepares individuals for freedom and equips them to contribute meaningfully to society. In this sense, democracy itself becomes a living educational project, a space in which habits, impulses, and intelligence interact to produce a continually renewing moral life. We can see this process in stories from everyday life. Consider Ravi, whose habitual focus on personal gain once ruled his decisions. When confronted with the consequences of his actions on the environment and community, an impulse toward awareness arose. Through reflection and intelligent action, he cultivated new habits of responsibility, sustainability, and mentorship. Or consider Aisha, a teacher whose inherited habits emphasized rote repetition. Her students' curiosity stirred new impulses, and through patient experimentation she developed habits that fostered dialogue, creativity, and critical thinking. In both cases, moral life emerges from the harmonization of habit, impulse, and intelligence, the practical realization of freedom and growth in action. Dewey reminds us too that ethical life embraces uncertainty. Life is an ongoing experiment, outcomes are rarely guaranteed. To demand certainty before acting is to forfeit the possibility of growth. Instead, we learn through action, observation, and revision. Failures are not signs of moral weakness but opportunities for learning. Each experiment in conduct, each moment of reflection and adjustment, contributes to the ongoing shaping of character and society. Moral life is therefore not a series of rigid prescriptions but a continuous engagement with experience, guided by intelligence, imagination, and the enduring desire for growth. And so, as we draw this Vedira reflection to its close, we recognize the full depth of Dewey's insight. Human nature is not fixed, conduct is not predestined, and character is not immutable. We are beings of habit, yet impulses rise within us, offering challenge and opportunity. Intelligence and imagination provide the tools to harmonize these forces, shaping conduct that is ethical, adaptive, and freeing. Each decision is a step in the lifelong project of self-formation, and each act contributes to the shaping of society itself. The beauty of Dewey's vision is that it is both profound and practical. Ethics is not removed from life, it is life, observed and guided with intelligence. Character is not hidden within, it is visible in the patterns of daily conduct. Freedom is not an abstract right, it is the ongoing capacity to grow and to direct our impulses and habits toward meaningful ends. And society is not a static backdrop, it is the shared space in which collective habits are formed, tested, and transformed. In the quiet reflection of this philosophy, Vedira invites us to see our lives as the continuous weaving of habit, impulse, and intelligence. To live wisely is to recognize the invisible forces that shape us, to act with awareness, and to cultivate the conditions in which growth can flourish, for ourselves and for those around us. To live ethically is not to follow commands, but to experiment in living, to harmonize impulses with habit, and to nurture the intelligence that guides our conduct toward freedom, dignity, and shared flourishing. Thus, the teachings of John Dewey echo across time, offering not abstract instruction but a profound invitation. To observe, to reflect, to act intelligently, to cultivate habits that serve life, and to embrace the ongoing art of becoming. In this dance of habit, impulse, intelligence, and imagination lies the promise of growth, freedom, and ethical living. The work is never finished, yet every conscious step, every thoughtful choice, every cultivated habit brings us closer to the life we are capable of living, the life of intelligence, creativity, and moral responsibility. And in this we find the Vedira voice within us, gentle, reflective, expansive, reminding us that the art of conduct is the art of living fully, the practice of freedom, and the ongoing creation of character in society. Every choice, every impulse, every habitual pattern, every reflection, is a note in the symphony of life, a symphony that we may learn to play with intelligence, grace, and purpose.